Thank you for the kind invitation. In the title page, I would like to call your attention to a relatively little known European document, the Bonn Declaration of Freedom on Scientific Declaration on Freedom of Scientific Research. Freedom of scientific research encompasses the right to freely define research questions, to choose and develop theories, gather empirical material and employ sound academic research method, to question accepted wisdom and bring forward new ideas. It entails the right to share, disseminate and publish the results. The text is okay, but the means are, the media is not in our hands. I did my career from solid earth geophysics, then I worked in the research administration of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, but already decades ago I wrote environmental oriented papers. Sorry for that. Yes. And when I retired 2 years ago, I started to concentrate on physics, on climate science. I published 2 papers together with the famous solar physicist Willy Soon and with other colleagues. And this second one has been quite popular. And I think, if I estimated correctly, 4 of the 23 co-authors are present as lecturer at this forum: Sebastian Lüning, Nicolas Cafetta, Anna Elias, and me. And Willy soon received the invitation. He was not able to ask and asked me to tell anything I would like to tell. So it will be a little bit broader. I would like than this paper. I would like to tell some words about the Hungarian situation in environmental and climate issues. We have a Hungarian EIKE. It is a true civil organization, and just 2 months ago we held a conference with 4 presentations. One of them was a state secretary of Hungary, and the message of the meeting was that total subordination of energy policy to climate policy is irrational and wasteful. So, okay. The overall situation in climate and energy issues in Hungary, there are of course conflicting views. There is a top-down approach, and there is a bottom-up approach, and they are conflicting. The first one is the top-down is quite ideology-driven, while the second one, the bottom-up, is prefers to discuss well-defined environmental problems. With the terms of the famous English philosopher Roger Scruton, it can be called as ecophilia-driven approach. We have this approach, I think, represent quite strongly in Hungary. Just 1 month ago, we had the World Conservation Forum in Hungary, and it demonstrated the strengthness of the ecophilia-driven, I think the normal approach, with the video presence of Naomi Seith, and without Greta Thunberg and without the Greenpeace. So, in this paper, today I would like to talk a little bit about ambiguities in basic, very basic terms, scan distortions and tricks in climate science data, some examples for Hungary in earth physics, and I think I will not have time. I would like to reduce my presentation, earth and man relationship. It will be too philosophical now and too late. So the environmental science has definite goals to learn how the natural world works, to understand how we as humans interact with the environment, to determine how we affect the environment, and to solve environmental problems. But there is a very deep problem. The problem is that the natural world is not the same as environment. And the definition of the environment, especially the selection and classification of environmental problems, is not independent of human values, and it is not independent of human interests. And while environmental science is influenced from the outside, natural scientists are not allowed to cross the border towards social scientists. Schuster bleibt bei deinem Leisten, they say us. And when we, natural scientists, reveal some systemic but hidden connections, we are discredited and stigmatized as conspiracy theory. But it is a fact that environmental science and its focal upon the whole climate change story has been formed since its birth by the same group of interest. In 1905, the US President Theodore Roosevelt put controls on big corporations. Its name was the Square Deal. And during a little bit more than 100 years, we arrived from the American Square Deal to the European Green Deal. Here you can find the main steps forming are the environmental science and climate science, climate policy, and almost every step you can find the same name, Maurice Strong. He was the father of global environmental governance processes, organized the first environmental congress, and followed not the politicians, but the street demonstrators. The street demonstrators were invited by him to Stockholm from Canada and Sweden. And he founded the United Nations Environmental Program, father of the Rio Convention, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the Kyoto Protocol, and so on and so on. He died in 2015. And what is written there, it is from the necrology written about him and celebrating him. So it is a fact. Definitions of the term climate. In the Greek, Klima, inclination slope, refers to the latitude zones from the equator to poles. The World Meteorological Organization emphasized the average behavior of the climate at a certain place. The American Meteorological Society emphasizes its global system, so it is a global system, the climate. 3 years ago, a German scientist collected a lot of definitions, and he had a conclusion that is the lack of clear definition of climate. And a famous hydrologist, Greek hydrologist, went further. He analyzed the definitions, and he arrived to the conclusion that the current definitions of climate do not highlight its non-static nature. There are some Hungarian physicists who introduced the concept of parallel states of climate. And they say we observed one single state at a given time instant among many, many possible states, but many other states would be plausible. It can be very primitively illustrated by the endpoint of a triple pendulum. It has a chaotic behavior. This chaotic behavior, in mathematical sense, and the space-time clusters you can see everywhere in a very wide range of time and space intervals. For the weather range, you can see here, it is a very famous diagram, shows for 1 month land and ocean temperature departure, and you can see here the clusters. The blue means colder, red means warmer, and they are not randomly distributed, but there is a systematic change. In longer term, also there are some some interrelations in the form of so-called teleconnections. I did not know anything about them, so I made a primitive alphabetic order, what I found in the scientific literature, and I found this year a paper by Hans-Joachim Lüdecke, about the main, most important teleconnections and showing its relation to the sunspot. But if you ask a meteorologist what drives weather, the usual answer is that what is the source of these teleconnections? The usual answer is weather drives weather, and I think it is a very questionable answer. Fortunately, there exists a unique time series I found after Demetris Koutsoyannis. He presented it at IUGG, International Union of Geodesy and Geophysical meeting a few years ago. And its significance is that it is not a proxy data series, proxy values, but measured values, the water level time series of River Nile near Cairo, Egypt. And what you can see that there is a long-term persistence in the data. This database was analyzed by Harold Edwin Hurst many years ago, and he developed a data analysis method and defined a term which is called the Hurst exponent. The Hurst exponent is very popular in economical databases, in many social issues, even exchange rates or energy prices. So for decades, there is one trend. One may think that the water level of Nile will all the times less and less, and there is some strange change, and the same is happening now with the energy. Speaking about Nile water level, Ruzmaikin and his colleagues found in this data series 11-year, 88 years, and a little bit more than 200-year periodicity. And he gave a good explanation, quite acceptable explanation, that solar activity modulates one of the teleconnections, which is acting in the catchment area of the Nile, and this leads to the water level variation of the Nile. The whole water level study is now under, data series is under study in Hungary now. Okay. Keeping this eternal fluctuation in time and space in mind, we understand better Demetris Koutsoyannis, why he thinks that climate change has no meaning. He told it should remain where it exactly belongs in the political vocabulary. But anyway, those Hungarian physicists say that there are the climate change can be scientifically defined as the evolution of snapshot attractors in the chaotic processes. But this is maybe too scientific. The central problem that in everyday use, the definition of climate change is completely misused. The World Meteorological Organization defines climate change as so it can be of natural and anthropogenic origin. But at the same time, the United Nations Framework Convention Program, defined the climate change, that climate change means a change of climate, which is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity and alters the composition of the global temperature, and which is in addition to natural change variability observed are over comparable time periods. What does it mean? It means that any natural forcings, possible forcings, are excluded, discredited from the definition of the climate change. For the IPCC, it has a double dipping because the IPCC applies correctly the VMO definition for scientists and the UNEP definition for policymakers. This is the reason why the public never knows what is meant actually under the expression, under the term climate change. And the second benefit for this mainstream direction, that is very easy among such conditions to attribute any climate change to anthropogenic CO2 emission. About climate science data. The total solar irradiance and temperature are discussed in a very detailed way in this paper I was talking about at the start of the presentation. It is a 70-page long paper, and it reflects very well the different viewpoints. And also I would like to tell some words about the albedo, because the albedo is as important as the total solar irradiance, because the net sunlight at the surface is the product of the TSI and 1 minus the albedo. And also I would like to tell some interesting data from the 19th century from Hungary and a recent Hungarian paper. So this is the paper. It was already discussed by Anna Elias yesterday. I would like to mention show the short history of the paper. So it was published in the journal in May. It was released by the publisher only on the day before the IPCC IR6 appeared. And the next week, and in an American daily journal, we could see this, the actual numbers of this journal. Daily newspaper, an article was written. He compared the IPCC report and this paper, and we enjoyed a censorship by the so-called climate feedback in the end of August, and 10th of September, the leading co-authors wrote an open letter to climate feedback, and it was published again in the Epoch Times and in non-mainstream media everywhere in the world. And to be sure that the meaning of this paper should reach the Hungarian public, the whole paper has already been published into Hungarian language. And I think the story has not ended yet. So this is a figure about this publication. This is the IPCC view, and this is the view of this paper. This is the temperature time series, 1 degree per centigrade per decade increase. This is the trend, but all meteorological stations, both urban and rural data are used. And in this paper, only the rural data are used. All the meteorological stations which are where there is an airport or housing estate, things like that, are excluded. And you can see that the trend is very different, and the trend reduces to 1.5 centigrade per decade. And you can see some dynamism in it. And the IPCC says that sun and volcanoes do not play any role. And if you take into account the ACRIM satellite data, you can find such a time series for the TSI value, which reminds to this time series. So depending on the data you select, you can arrive to any conclusion. But considering all data correctly, the conclusion cannot be the same as the conclusion of the IPCC. About the albedo, also in the Kutsoyannis papers, in the appendix, I found this astonishing figure. There are 2 satellite data systems to measure the albedo. A lot of money is spent to measure the albedo, and Ceres and MERRA. And you can see that one of the databases show a decrease in the Earth's albedo, the second shows an increase. It is simply astonishing how less we know about the albedo. By the way, Steve Kunin they have a ground-based observatory by using the phenomenon of earthshine, but we do not have time to go into that details. And it also reflects somehow the solar activity. This is a CO2 paper I found in a medical doctor. A medical doctor wrote this paper in 1881, Joseph Fodor. It is an almost forgotten paper, and you can see they correctly corrected the CO2 atmospheric concentration values, not ppm, but 1000 values are given here. But nowadays, for the end of the 19th century, only those values are judged as correct, which are lower than 300 ppm. For example, in Schulze, in Rostock measured 292 ppm, but in Klausenburg, it is in Transylvania, Kolozsvár in Hungarian, and Munich and Budapest, close to 400 ppm were measured. And in Madrid, when, in Rostock the value was low, it was known by them, Joseph Fodor and his European colleagues, that in a cold sea, the solubility of the CO2 is very high. So this is the reason why the CO2 concentration is less than 300 ppm there, and also in Lund and Deep. But in Madrid, when the vegetation is weak and far from sea, at that time the characteristic CO2 value was more than 500 ppm. This paper is not mentioned even the non-IPCC review written by this Beck German scientists some 15 years ago. Maybe some interesting things about the carbon pools, I can say. These values are from the IPCC reports. Today and yesterday, these data were mentioned. But in very recent Earth Science paper, they say that the Earth's mantle has enormous quantity of carbon. Only the diamond, the quantity of diamond, this Earth's mantle, is 10,000 gigaton. The petagram and the gigaton are the same quantities. There was a discussion about this question. And especially the outer core of the Earth contains a lot of carbon. And in the cooling, in the cooling asthenosphere, it was written by a Hungarian group just 2 months ago. Formation of pargazit, as it is a specific mineral, so there is a mineral factory at the depth of the Earth, can easily lead to CO2 emission, not only via volcano, but simple by via faults and cracks and so on and so on. And if CO2 is produced, then thinking of its volatility, I think that geodynamics might play a significant role in the carbon budget. So finally, there is a question that if we compare two numbers, the carbon concentration in the solid Earth is told to be between 600 ppm and 6,000 ppm. It is a carbonaceous chondrite. The CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is, let's say, 420 ppm. I would have a malicious question. Comparing the two values, what is the problem with the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere? From Earth physics, I would like to mention also two Hungarian papers, then some general approach and the importance of ground-based geophysical observatories. This is the Ferenc Miskolci's hypothesis. Here you can find the transmitted, absorbed, upward and downward fluxes in 3 regions. So he has experimental results based on his hardcode software and old radio sound measurements. And his theoretical results are as follows. The 4 laws are suggested as theoretical results, and these values satisfy all these laws: the atmospheric Kirchhoff law, atmospheric virial law, conservation of energy of atmospheric radiation, and radiation balance law. This hypothesis, it is a correct scientific hypothesis which needs, I think, new tests with new reliable data. Bernd Fleischmann, I think his approach was very similar partly to this approach. Another paper, not very much cited, was published some 4 years ago, Szabolcs Barca, unfortunately he died. It's a very sound physical paper that radiative contribution of the greenhouse gas CO2 cannot be more than 21%. There is some error bars, of course. So there's the interaction between the spheres have much more, there are so many interactions between the atmosphere, the biosphere, the cryosphere, the hydrosphere, ocean and land waters, and the geosphere, which should be taken into account from the inner Earth to magnetosphere, and between them you can the atmosphere, the cryosphere, the hydrosphere, everything. So I think correctly the Earth system should be written here. And we have the Sun in central role, the heliosphere. In several papers, the lectures there, they were mentioned that it is really has an important and central role. And we have the solar system. It is a field of interest of Nicola Scafetta, for example, and the outer space are very important. So what we can do, okay, in the last modification, I deleted this question, but if it is shown, I explain you. I met a solar physicist at the shore Balaton this summer, and I asked him that Sun is the changing star. You, solar physicist, why not address its consequences for the Earth's climate? And the answer is unbelievable, was me. We do not deal with such inferior things as humanity. We are dedicated to solving universe-scale problems. So it was a mainstream solar physicist, not a, okay. So, what we can do in order to understand this system, imaging of observed data is needed, and not only meteorological data. And imaging means mapping, transformation, and visualization, and let the data speak. Gus Berghut talked about it just a few weeks ago. I skip because it is too complicated figure, just an example from Hungarian geophysical observatory where we measure, or my colleague, younger colleague, measure all the electromagnetic parameters since the International Geophysical Year. That time this observatory was established. Geomagnetism, Earth currents, atmospheric electrical potential gradient, and the Schumann resonance is an ionosphere-related quantity. And you can see that from year to year there are some systematic variation which needs explanation. And atmospheric electric potential gradient time series, there is a tendency, and the tendency is broken, and it's very interesting, the tendency was broken. Hoppa. This is the correct place. I do not know what happened, this symbol. This is due to the Chernobyl accident. So not only natural, but anthropogenic changes can be measured by using such methods. I think this will be my last slide because of lack of time. And the progress in climate science depends on progress in quantitative imaging of various phenomena in space and time. I would like to to invite a quote from a former PhD student of Kirchhoff, Helmholtz and Bunsen, of course he's Hungarian, from Heidelberg from the 19th century. No matter how much our physical theories evolve, however, they will always rely on assumptions that can no longer be proven. The real researcher knows he has to give up on learning about the ultimate causes of nature, but he is not discouraged like Faust, who demands an infinite reward for finite work, but moves forward relentlessly toward an attainable goal and finds joy in the research itself and in the results it exerts to promote the material well-being of mankind. Again, the material well-being of mankind. After all, we must rest assured that science does not necessarily give a true explanation of natural phenomena, but only leads closer to the limit where the elusive begins. And the name is Roland Eötvös, a famous Hungarian physicist. So, with other words, with modern words, the real science, the true science, cannot settle it. Thank you for your attention.
Ganz herzlichen Dank für diese interessanten Ausführungen und auch dafür, dass Sie die Zeit im Auge behalten haben. Und ich denke, es gibt jetzt doch dazu Kommentare oder Fragen. Ja.
Not a question, more of a comment. I was very pleased to see that you mentioned Maurice Strong. He's a very interesting character. He can truly be described as the father of the modern environmental movement. And he has his roots in the oil business in Alberta, Canada, with close connections to the Rockefeller oil empire. So it can be claimed that big oil started the modern environmental movement. That's it.
Thank you. I only mentioned the fact. It is a fact that his name occurs almost at every step.
Weitere Fragen? Das war ja auch wieder kurz und knapp, das kennen wir gar nicht. So. Ah ja, danke, danke, danke.
I think you and also the Mr. mentioned with Maurice Strong a very important point, because you define the political frame with his name. Yeah. I will give a very impressive quote of him. I quote, "Frankly, we make it to the point where the industrial states have to collapse to save the world. This is a political agenda." And I'm very pleased that you have the courage to mention this name and also the political frame. Thank you.
Yes, I think he told it in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. Yeah.
Thank you for your speech. My name is Lüdecke, and you have cited us. And you told in your paper that we would predict weather with weather. It's not quite true. Our drivers are the sun. Sun is not weather. And then the other drivers are ocean cycles. Yeah. It's also not weather. It's only a little objection, because you said, I told you, weather with weather. It's not quite true.
Yes, I made a mistake in that sentence, I know, and I forgot to quote where this weather drives weather answer comes from. But I found it in a discussion about teleconnections. The opinion of meteorologists was about this mysterious behavior of teleconnections, that weather drives weather, and it is not acceptable.
I was very pleased to hear your talk, since it went a bit above the atmosphere and gave us a sort of an eagle's view on things. There were very interesting other talks which were very specific to lots of data here and measurement there, and I think they are extremely important. But not only your slide where you went up and looked at all the various spheres which are involved and which very likely sum up a lot of works which we have heard from other talkers today, and so it let me step back a step and let me see the big picture, and perhaps that was so for other people too, and that's why I want to thank you.
Much more detailed, more geophysical approach was shown by Niels Axel Mørner some 8 years ago. His name was mentioned in connection with the sea level variation. But I found it too specific to show, because it is a finite number of interaction which is mentioned in Mørner paper. I think there is what is considered cause can be impact and vice versa. So you do not know. Maybe the outer space gives some signals. We cannot interact with that, but the atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, you do not separate the cause and consequence. So that's why I did not show any physical relationship.
My name is Andreas Demmig. About a question about your home country, do you think the situation there is much more free and better for scientists than in Germany?
Well, I use my membership at the Academy to represent true environmental science and climate science, and it is not easy, but I am survive. So I would like to induce scientific debate at the Academy, which is not easy. Scientists, as individual scientists, they understand what is the science, but as the institutions in Hungary are very much depend on European Union. But I think in general the situation, at least in energy, is much more healthy in Hungary than in Germany. In climate, there are signs that that something is not okay with the mainstream idea, but the young generation is so how to say attracted by this simplistic views that it is difficult to change the public opinion.
Ja, dann sehe ich keine Wortmeldung mehr, und dann bedanken wir uns ganz herzlich bei Ihnen und ja, klatschen nochmal. Ja.